Hey there, and welcome to the Muckcast, a cozy listen to pair with your coffee. I'm Hannah, the writer behind Hannah's Cafe on Medium, where I cover everything from music to psychology as a woman living abroad. Here, I read my stories aloud with a few fresh reflections and insights along the way. So grab your mug, settle in, and welcome to today's piece. I am excited to be back on the podcast and uncover a new piece of female psychology or female wisdom through the lens of what's hot and new in popular media at the moment. And if you haven't been sleeping, what's new is definitely the Grammys. I've been talking about the Grammys last time already because I was talking about the album Looks by Rosalia, which I think was a complete miss at the Grammys. I completely missed any mention of her, but somebody who did definitely get a lot of the spotlight was Billie Eilish. I don't know if you have been able to avoid the videos about her speech, but I'm guessing no, because Billie Eilish left a great impression at the Grammys, and it got me thinking, not just about her art, who she is, and how she presents herself, but about the Gen Z artistry in general, how specifically young artists today showcase themselves, how they use their voices. And I was specifically intrigued because these Grammys were marked with a lot of different events that were very political and very strong messages. And I remember this one interview specifically where I don't remember, I think it was Leve being asked on the red carpet about what she remembered from 2016. And she was supposed to compare that to 2026, of course. And she said she doesn't remember anything specific from 2016 besides the fact that 2016 music was just so free and so almost naive in comparison to 2026 music, where she said the entire surroundings are just so much more grim that music and artistry has the obligation to reflect that. And I love that statement. Not only do I love Leve, but I also love how she thinks, and I absolutely support that statement. In times that are the way that they are right now, which is not particularly happy, art has an obligation to reflect that. And so I'm really excited to see a lot of Gen Z artists standing up for themselves, standing up for their voices, and making a statement. And thus, I would say Billie Eilish is very important as a key figure to talk about because she's been doing that for a while, and she's one of those people who've grown up with fame, or at least grown into fame. And she's been using her voice a lot, very actively, very recently, and somehow a lot of people seem to have a distaste towards it because see a lot of people online calling her performative or a performative activist, which I personally find funny because she's a performer and she's an activist. So, yes, she's a performing activist, if you want to call her that. But yeah, the word performative is really one of the favorites on the internet right now, and it's driving me a little bit nuts because it's such a easy and yet painful comment to launch upon somebody who has a genuine interest in moving a discussion forward. It's such a hurtful comment to leave for people who have genuinely caught fire for some debate that they really want to move forward. So today, in leaning on this idea of performative activism and Billie Eilish, my goodness, I hope I'll be able to say this name better throughout this reading because that's going to come up a lot. So the title of this reading will be Billie Eilish and the Shadow of a Wildflower, Gen Z's Performative Activism. The depressive Gildan teen who, and the musical mirror of youth, who fights billionaires and ice but is yet never satisfied. Again, like with any of my readings, the basic article that I'm reading will be linked below. It's an article that I've written on Medium just very recently. And if you click the link below, you will see the illustration that I made for this article, and you can read along in case you would like to read along or click open any links because I did link some of the music in case you want to listen. So, yeah, the Medium article is linked below. Let's dive into it. If you live within the bubble of the music industry, you will have noticed that Billie Eilish won the Song of the Year at the Grammys 2026, one of the four major categories for her song Wildflower. Again, this is the song of the year, not the record of the year. Yeah, record of the year is more like a category for, I guess, recorded artistry. So anything that happens in the recording process, the best recording, I would say, like literally the studio made song. And the song of the year is supposed to be more about the songwriting and the meaning of the song. So Billie Eilish really won this award for her songwriting, which is, of course, what she's best at. Now, Billie is a Gen Z girl known for her unshielded advocacy of topics that matter to her, and recently she's become more and more outspoken at broadcasted events, often leading the headlines with short citations that echoed through every social media feed. And you know what? The funny thing is, people really hate it, which to me is hilariously entertaining while no less saddening. As a Gen Z myself, I understand her struggles. One could say, I feel her, and the need to express clearly what she stands for, especially as someone with the means to have an actual impact. Also, as just another white girl in this multifaceted generation, I sometimes feel like I see a little bit of my own shadow in her. So in this article I will talk a little bit about the recent uproar around Billie Eilish. I will look at how her harsh words are reflected in her music. I will explain the psychological model of the subconscious shadow and how it is related to both Billie and Gen Z as a whole. And thus, I will show why Billie might just be another Gen Z with a larger stage and a microphone. Sharp tongued and depressed, Billie and I have quite a lot in common. For instance, that we were born the same year, and though I'm turning 25 today, yes, it is my birthday, she's still remaining 24 and for another 11 months. Yet her career started when she was 13, as her first single, Ocean Eyes, became a surprise hit online, and she's been in the public eye since then. Having grown up with this sort of fame, many call her a Nepo baby or child star who knows nothing about the hardships of life. But I'm not here to judge someone else's from rags to riches narrative, because most of those in history have proven to go horribly wrong. Her songs are often very soft and emotional at times they might be a little bit edgy and depressive. Haters argue they are the sound of teenagehood. And Billie herself agrees with some of these comments, especially concerning her earlier work. In interviews, she remembers being criticized for exaggerating her emotions in her lyrics, to which she said, quote unquote, I was literally a teenager myself. And as a teenager, I don't have the knowledge. All you have is emotions. So that is what I wrote about. Despite some hate, her audience resonates with these statements. But growing up doesn't make things easier for her. Billie's face is not new, but one might argue that adult Billie is kind of new. And similar to general perceptions of Gen Z growing up, the public does seem to have a specific distaste towards it. At a recent event for the Wall Street Journal, Billie dropped the following statement into a room full of billionaires, which was on everyone's Instagram page for the following week. Here I quote again, love you all, but there are a few people in here that have a lot more money than I do. And if you're a billionaire, why are you a billionaire? No hate, but give your money away, shorties. And seriously, the shorties part was a banger in my eyes. This sparked debate about billionaires online. Many influencers started using every single grain of rice in their pantries to visualize the difference between $1 million and $1 billion. And Billie herself donated $11.5 million of her tour profits to combating food inequity and climate change. In fact, she's known to be an avid donator and a climate conscious vegan. But of course, the haters weren't far away from the comment section and were calling her just another rich person trying to shield her money. Well, and then this Sunday, the Grammys happened. Billie was nominated for the Song of the Year category with her song Wildflowers, which notably dropped on her album Hit Me Hard and Soft on the 18th of May 2024. What was it doing at the 2026 Grammys, you may ask, because 2024 is quite a while ago. The song was re recorded 1 year later. which technically put it on the correct time frame to be considered for 2026 Grammys. There's a couple of technicalities involved that allowed this song to turn up in the correct time frame. And yet, many argue that this was unfair, and a song like Apate, which truly influenced the last year, should have been chosen. I guess this will remain a debate for the foreseeable future, especially considering that the board of judges for the Grammys, which I think is like 15,000 people, um, they are not choosing based on which song was the most impactful or, again, the most heard or most listened to. What they care about in choosing the song of the year is, again, how well it is written, the songwriting quality. And in that department, I do agree with them. Wildflower is very, very, very impactful. Truly, her album Hit Me Hard and Soft is very Grammy worthy in my eyes, but some hold the argument that this should have been the album of the year last year. But this is an endless debate of musical tastes, of which everyone is entitled to their very own. If you see this win of Wildflower as the full circle moment, where Billie finally is awarded the Grammy that she deserved after all, or whether you view it as just one moment, one more moment in time where the committee of the Grammys chose a US artist over the many international voices who were influencing 2025 maybe more deeply, that is a debate to be had, but at another time. And what the internet loves to pick apart far more than the actual Grammys, it seems, is the statements that Billie made as she went on stage to receive the award, which is, and I quote again, "As grateful as I feel, I honestly don't think I need to say anything but no one is illegal on stolen land. We need to keep protesting. Our voices really do matter and the people do matter. Fuck ICE is all I want to say. Sorry." And the fuck ICE part was censored in some of the short videos that were circulating, as well as the YouTube summaries, which I found is such a hilarious artifact of American broadcasting, because as a European, somebody saying fuck is not really that crazy to me. But I just love how American television and also songwriting, I love how, like, some songwriters have so many fucks in their songs and then half of their song is just blank. It is hilarious, in my opinion. Okay. And mind you, almost every winner and even the host of the evening threw several hard punches at the current political situation in the USA. And while everyone stands with these other statements that were being made, Billie gets backlash because, right, she's a rich singer with a villa in LA. And in the aftermath, it turned out that there is, in fact, a native tribe that used to live in the LA Valley where Billie's Villa stands. Oh my gosh, that's a tongue breaker. Billie's Villa stands. And just with likely every other speck of the land in the USA, there is somebody else who was originally on that land. It is thus arguable in the eyes of some that if Billie demands that no one is illegal on stolen land, she should hand back her villa in the midst of a neighborhood of rich people to this tribe that originally lived in the LA Valley. Now, I find this funny because for once, if no one is illegal on stolen land, then neither is Billie herself. And I mean, every single house in that area would have to be, removed. And I dare say that that's never going to happen. There is a mistake in the Matrix if that is how the sentience is being used. It is a hilarious argument to be made, in my opinion, especially lovely in my eyes when screamed by aspiring rich content creators online who strive to gain clicks by attacking her as they scream that rich people should not judge and should be held accountable. Like, sure, Johnny. And once you have $1 billion in a villa, can I knock on your door too? Or also, Johnny, where do you live right now? I sure as hell can find the tribe that your house is built on. But this is, again, a very difficult debate, which many people seem to not want to hear coming from the brain of a person who's as young as Billie. They argue that she should stick to her music, but that's where they're really wrong because, in an interesting way, the kind of music that Billie writes is the exact reason why I think she needs this sort of political activism and why that's such a natural draw for so many Gen Z people. Sing about emotions and mature opinions. Wildflowers is not a song about mass deportations, racism, or climate change. It's a song about withering love and the emotional turmoil that comes with it. Billie is known to look depressed. Her sound might sometimes sound a little bit depressed to some, and she has a history of being diagnosed with depression. Her voice has a very soft and breathy sound, often in her head register, but she can have a strong register presence towards the end of her songs as well. And this is especially true for hits like The Greatest, which basically are a huge build up towards her belting and riffing at the end. But her signature is nonetheless the whisper like timbre and the subtle vibrato, sounding pained and almost a little bit out of breath, while she proves that she has an immense lung capacity because that is what such a sound really demands. It might be easy on your ears, but many of her lines are very, very high and almost whiny, as the sound transports the feeling of being very, very close to tears. Her lyrics never fall short of this immediate intimacy, with songs like My Future singing about telling goodbye to your home to meet your future self. Or, of course, the infamous What Was I Made For, which was in the Barbie movie, hitting the hearts of not just every young person, but maybe especially for women. And that's all while the lyrics, ideation, songwriting, and everything is still done by her and her brother Phineas most first and foremost. Probably and notably, her song list of collaborators is usually a lot shorter than that of other artists. Like if you went into her Spotify songs and check the collaborations, you will find yes, of course, she has people who are mixing and doing the studio, um, the finishing the songs in the studio. But a lot of the previous parts are done merely by her and her brother, which is not true for most artists. Her songs often play in a sort of trance, especially if you listen to Hit Me Hard and Soft in one go, which is produced in a way that helps you lose track of where each of the songs begins and ends as they naturally ebb and flow into each other. Thus, this album is one that must absolutely be listened to in order, I think at least. But why does a girl who whispers about failing love and painful self discovery into a microphone blast political advocacy once put on a stage? That, in my opinion, has something to do with what I see in the subconscious shadow of my generation, Gen Z as a whole, and my God, something that I think also holds true for Billie. A shadow on the internet. Gen Z is considered a pain generation of self victims during COVID, on the one hand, or a generation that suffered at length during social isolation. We're either the primroses of fragile mental health or the first generation to be aware enough to solve generational trauma. And the only difference between these two extremes is who views us and how seriously they can relate. So it makes sense that Billy can be both patient in therapy for depression treatment and a political spokesperson. The reason why is that she's not the one writing the story, others control her narrative, which is kind of a repeating story for people who are in the public eye. She once said cheekily during an interview that she loved writing music for movies, not just because she won 2 Oscars for the film music, but also she explains that it's easier for her to put herself into the shoes of another person and write from their perspective than it is from writing from herself. And she's completely right. It is easier to write about someone else and someone else's story, which is why we all love to talk about celebrities, stars, and artists. The reason behind why we react to some and to others we don't react at all is hidden in the subconscious, in the infamous shadow. This is one of the most general and probably most widely reproduced terms that I've recently seen posted across the internet in the realm of psychology. The reason is that anything dark seems to draw people in. Isn't it an intriguing idea to find out about those dark and shaded corners of your mind, your previously unprocessed thoughts that you can now have access to? And this is precisely what started the grand rise of psychology, actually, about 100 years ago now, with Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and Alfred Adler in Austria around the turn of the century. They were interested in the human psyche, but primarily in the part that we now call the subconscious. Each decade since, the subconscious domain has been explored further, leading to multiple ideas about its different components. One of the parts that one of the parts of this landscape, according to Carl Jung, so a theory that's already quite old, is the shadow. And through the other parts, and though the other parts are very interesting, This one is kind of the one that people seem to be most interested in and most drawn to. Merely, I would honestly suggest because it's marketable. It sounds pretty cool to talk about your shadow. It's maybe not so cool to talk about yourself. Maybe it's also cool to talk about your mask or persona, but people haven't really done that so much, I find. So, the idea behind the shadow as a whole is that it contains the part of yourselves that you are trying to neglect, the parts that you would rather keep hidden in the literal shadow. And this is where I find many short videos or YouTube tutorials go a bit wrong, especially the ones that talk about female psychology and then use the shadow, because a lot of these girls are femininity coaches. And I think that the way that they approach female psychology is very, it's not aiding feminism. It's very much it lends itself to the femininity narrative, which oftentimes I find plays in the wrong direction because it doesn't lead to more advocacy and more opinions and choices for women to be made, but it gives you like a roadmap. The problem that I see in a lot of these femininity YouTube channels or whatever other online outlets that reproduce femininity content is it's not giving women a choice, it's outlining a path for them to take. It's telling you, according to your shadow, which can look like this or could look like that, you should do certain things. Like you should dress a certain way if you want to be a dark feminine. And I really don't support this type of narrative because it's, in my eyes, too prescriptive. Um, I think the whole point of feminism and growing up in the 21st century rather than the 20th is that we now have a choice. And I want to make sure that pop psychology or pop feminism or femininity, even like femininity channels, don't get that wrong. They shouldn't start producing content that is prescriptive so women have another narrative to follow. I think there's enough paths for women to follow, and it's about making sure that they have the advocacy to make their own decisions. That's what's important to me. So, where I find most short videos and YouTube videos go wrong or tutorials go wrong when they explain the female shadow is finding your shadow is not assuming the opposite of who you are is inside you, which is often the narrative. They say the opposite of what you like is your shadow. That's not entirely true because that's not subconscious. That's very much a conscious thing. So this is actually a clinical condition, and you call it dissociative identity disorder if you think that the opposite of yourself is inside of you. And this makes me hope that some of these influencers seek some psychological testing because I really do hope that they haven't truly found the opposite of themselves in themselves because that's kind of freaking scary. Okay. However, you can look for the unintegrated part of yourself around you by checking what you usually have a sort of chemistry with in a good or in a bad way. You look at what your attention is drawn to, what attracts your attention, and all of those things can be symptoms of your shadow, such as who you are attracted to, especially if these are kind of similar types of people or unhealthy types of people that others are making you aware of. Take a look at the people you love, or especially the people you love to hate. And this is, I think, where the whole shadow narrative comes from. It is a sort of negative thing. The thing that you react to the most is maybe in your shadow. That's the idea. Or you can look at what you feel morally righteous about. If you feel very morally righteous about a topic, that might be something that you haven't processed or something that is hiding in your shadow. Or you can look at what you want to fix about others. Maybe what you want to fix about others is actually a reflection of what you haven't really worked through yourself, something you haven't learned to accept. Because we only react to the things that we haven't dealt with enough. And that's the idea of the shadow. So, now with this information in mind, I want you to sit back and think for a second about what music you feel very deeply about, which artists you feel maybe morally righteous about, and which online debates you are currently raging about. And if you found something, you're correct. That might be where your shadow is lying. This is where your shadow is calling from. It's not the easy black and white debate of you are yourself and the opposite of yourself is a shadow. No, that's not how easy Like, that's not how easy it is. It's a bit more complicated. But and it's a little bit uncomfortable because you will find that the things you hate most are maybe just reflections of you not having done your work properly on yourself. So, Billy's case here, as an example, is especially interesting. She never seems happy about receiving awards, which is sometimes something that comes up again and again in the TikTok videos about her, how she looks kind of sad when she receives her awards. She always thanks her fellow artists first and foremost in the category that she's in, and she almost makes it seem like she's undeserving of the title. And she first and foremost uses the opportunity, especially most recently, to drive the attention towards topics that matter to her rather than talking about herself. And I will point out at this point, very, very important, that I don't know Billie personally. I can't say that this is a for sure thing, and I don't want to interpret it into Billie. I'm basically using her now as a mirror ground for you to look at what you might see in yourself. So I don't know Billie personally, and I can't say if this is 100% true, but what I can tell you that is that I see this in myself, and I see this in a lot of my age peers. So I'm going to explain a little bit more of what I mean by that. When I see her surprised about winning the Grammys, when I see her charging for words on a stage as she tries to leave the stage meaningfully, I see a young woman with big thoughts rotating in her mind, a heart that leaps for meaning and has a need to change things for the better, and in doing so, cannot even accept a compliment. Especially the can't accept a compliment part I see in so many of my friends. No matter if it's a Golden Gramophone, an Artist of the Year award, or a small golden man called Oscar, she's aware of the bigger impact she could have if she shed the light from herself onto something else that is important to her. So she leaves the thanks behind and dedicates the applause not to her mom, her dad, her producers, or her brother, which she also thanks, but she turns it into a voice for those who remain unheard. And you know who does that? You know people who can do that? It's always people who feel deeply, people who are emotionally literate, people who have empathy, and those who know and maybe are a little bit afraid of their own advantages in life. Because if you don't feel deeply and have these meaningful topics on top of your head, then you wouldn't mention them as you're getting called out for an award that you didn't expect. And that is what I see in a lot of Western Gen Zs, especially white ones. I'm sorry I said it, are terrified. We are terrified. And at least from my observation of one very, very central thing, we are scared of how good we've had it, or we currently still have it. Music is a mirror to youth. Billie might be afraid of being called a Nepo baby or being robbed of her house by a tribe, and so she calls billionaires shorties and calls fuck ice at the Grammys. And I will be very open and vulnerable here, maybe more than I should probably be. The thing I am most afraid of is my comfortable life as a white woman from Europe. The only way I can imagine myself being more filled with fear is if I were a white man, to be honest. It's not just my race and the shame around my ancestors and what they did, something that I have no power over. It's something that already happened and yet I still have to struggle with for the rest of my life. As dramatic as that sounds, I will always carry that with me. It's an integral part of my daily life. I live in a very international environment, and meeting people from other countries and other cultures, I can't shake that feeling of the fear of my own comfortable background. It is the fear of how amazingly peaceful my world has been up until now. Since our Gen Z brains, little baby brains, were first trying to comprehend the world, my generation has been labeled the fortunate ones living in peace. It's always been the narrative for me that I have it good. But also, I've been told that we're the last ones to make the change, or we're the first ones to see the effects of either climate crisis or luring conflicts. I grew up with an awful lot of documentaries and foreshadowings from scientists who told me how many meters above my nostrils the water would rise by 2050. And is it overreacting? Maybe. And I honestly, I hate people online who victimize us. I recently saw this post where an ongoing influencer shared how bad life as a Gen Z was, and that really people should start cutting us some slack. And then she listed all these things like, we were the ones who survived COVID. We were the ones who had to grow up with social media. We're the ones who are constantly under information like raining down on us. The replies under this post were filled with a lot of teary eyed, oh, finally someone understands me. We have it so bad. Somebody understands my pain. And honestly, I firmly disagree with Gen Z self diagnosing or self victimizing ourselves because the fact stands. The white Western Gen Z population, which were assembled in that comment section, have it better than any of the generations before us. And that is the most fucking scary thing I can think of, us losing our advantaged position. Because it's so damn fragile, and the world at the moment does nothing to prove me wrong in how fragile it really is. That is why I think we have Fridays for Future, and that is why I think Billy points out the difference between human height and bank account size in billionaires. We see that there are things out there that are more important than us and much bigger than us that need our attention. But contrary to some doe-eyed people who cheer us on, I think as Gen Z, the truth is not that we are brave. We're just more scared. And not scared to shit where we start voting for interesting opinions. Some do. Like I can't speak for the entirety of my generation, of course, but I think we're scared in that we're scared of the future a little bit. I think that it is in fact the one big collective shadow that Billie Eilish and I, as well as some other Gen Zs that I know, share, and that is a looming future anxiety. We get diagnosed through psychological testing as anxious or depressed, but what gives us the proper background for this anxiety and depression is a whole load of world dread in a generation that has never had the pleasure of escaping information. Jung actually had the concept of the collective subconscious, which among psychologists this is a highly debated and not entirely factual thing. But I think that world dread is something that is in the collective shadow of Gen Z. And those who don't voice it are left with selling makeup or glow up diaries to lump sum of leaking individuals who are ready to invest in a bucket rather than a plaster. So Billy so to call Billy overly emotional or a performative art activist, because all that goes to show is in my eyes that okay. So in my eyes you can call Billy overly emotional or a performative art activist if you want to, because all that goes to show in my eyes is that you haven't dealt with yourself yet. Literally, she's a performer and an activist, so the fact that she could even view that as an insult is interesting. I firmly prefer the part of my generation that can take compliments and has a conscience over that part that is nothing but performative and point blank. Because trust me, not all Gen Zs are like Billy. So now, for anybody who's not a Gen Z, and I think this article really goes to Gen Zs and millennials, but if you're not, look yourself in the eye. Do you like what you see? Now, look at some news and then turn around to face the mirror again. Do you still like what you see? And if you can now feel the ache in your heart after truly asking yourself those last two questions, you've been introduced to the feeling of what it's like to be a Gen Z. That was the reading for this episode. I'm very passionate about this article, not only because I've personally done a lot of researching on shadow work and I've seen a lot of people derive a lot of information and learning and deep insights from the concept of the shadow as well as the collective shadow. I find that idea of the collective shadow also very interesting because it's very cultural and I love to talk about the topic of culture. But I feel very deeply about this idea of the collective shadow of Gen Z and how we're afraid to lose our peaceful existence. And I'm talking, again, I will emphasize that I'm talking from a Western perspective here because I'm fully aware, and that is part of my dread, that I spent my life in a very fortunate position and that I might be losing that, of course. Which this fear, and I want to highlight that as well, is not holding me back from sharing what I have, because that I think is a difference in fear. It's funny that sometimes people in Austria right now, we have a big draw towards right wing politicians. Not the only ones in the world who are doing that, but also we're part of that problem, I would say. And a lot of people are arguing that it's fear mongering. Fear drives people to vote for right wing candidates, and fear makes people xenophobic. And I think that's the interesting thing about humans in general, but specifically Gen Z. We grew up with that idea of losing our future. We grew up with this narrative of we're the last generation that dot 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 dot. Um, we're the first to feel climate change. We're the last to have peace, something like that. Um, so that is already a pain point in our shadow that we're trying to suppress unless you face it. And if you face it, you become an activist, like Billy. You speak up about it, which might be uncomfortable for older generations because we barely just became adults, but at the same time, at least in their lifespans, but at the same time, it's something that I think is so necessary to face because it's the type of fear that if we face it, it drives us. And I think it would make for a better society, where we can all embrace our differences and where, especially for women, we get to make our choices and nobody judges us based on it. For women and basically all people who are a little bit different. So, yeah, that is the reading for today's podcast episode. I am so thankful that you granted me access to your ears on the Mugcast today. You can read more of my writing on Medium under Hannah's Cafe or follow me on Instagram at hugin.amug for cozy content and updates. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow the podcast and share it with a fellow coffee lover. And let me know in the comments which article I should read next. I hope you had a nice cappuccino with this episode, and I'm sending you a warm hug from my mug to yours. Hope to see you somewhere on Hannah's Cafe. Bye.